welcome to this episode of Filmy Ladies. I am Pitu, this is Beth, and today we are joined by the ghost of Rebecca. So today is one of those episodes that we're going to do our book to movie adaptation episodes, and we're talking about Rebecca, and Kohra. The first Rebecca that I mentioned is the 1938 novel by Daphne du Maurier, beloved of people all around the world, and I do mean the world because this book has been adapted into numerous languages. It's been translated into numerous languages, and there is such a wealth of movies, TV shows, miniseries, all sorts of things all around the world that you can access. The movies that we're going to talk about today are the 1940 Alfred Hitchcock directed Rebecca, starring Laurence Olivier and Joan Fontaine, and the 1964 Kohra, which is in Hindi, directed by Biren Nag, and it stars Wahida Rahman and Biswajit.
And I know that surprise twist. I also watched another Rebecca.
Okay.
Which is from the 90s and stars Charles Dance and Amelia Fox.
Okay, I was actually not aware of that adaptation. The only other one I knew was, I think there's a Netflix one that just came out, right? But it has like Armie Hammer in it or something. And I was like, when people can watch the one that has Laurence Olivier, why would they put themselves through this Netflix? But no one is giving them, no one is giving them logical advice. Or for that matter, Biswajit, Beth.
We'll get to that.
Okay, so my first question to you, Beth, is because I do know also that you have written about Kohra. If you guys want to read Beth's blog, she's actually written up about Kohra, so you can go check that out as well, and we'll link to it in the comments. But what about Rebecca do you think, Beth, has captivated audiences literally all over the world that people can't stop adapting this into movies?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because spoiler alerts will be in this episode for
so many
all
spoilers.
The versions that we read or saw, and they're not all exactly the same. A little bit like Devdas, like this guy is awful. He is a murderer. The book makes no bones about it, right? He is a murderer. Various films do other things with that. And yet this tale clearly speaks to people at different times and places, and people want to adapt it. It's very atmospheric. It's very just interesting, right? Like watching it all. I had never read the book until last week ever. I'd seen, Kohra, and I had seen the 40s one before. But so I loosely knew this story, but I was still just riveted the whole time.
Yes.
She's just such a good storyteller in that sort of keep you fascinated kind of way. So I think it's just gripping. And I think also, maybe you will know better than I feel like we don't get too many heroines in narratives of any kind who is so pathologically insecure. And she's our unnamed narrator. She's so she's so lacking a sense of self that she doesn't even get a name, and I think that's really interesting because that's relatable in a way, although not to the extent that she is, right? But her just absolute lack of self-confidence is, again, really fascinating. And maybe that kind of speaks to some makers, because I don't feel like we see that a ton. We get a lot of women who are like fake insecure or sort of insecure about maybe more surfacey things or whatever. But this woman has, just no sense of who she is, her own.
I know nothing about her.
Yeah. And that's very unnerving.
Yeah. And I know everything about Rebecca.
Right.
But I know nothing about her. I mean, given that I read the book, I've watched the Rebecca movie, I watched Kohra, and I couldn't tell you anything about the unnamed narrator. I don't know her favorite color. I don't know what food she likes to eat. I don't know what her type is. I mean, yes, I know she married Max de Winter, who wouldn't, but, I don't know anything about her. I don't think she knows anything about herself as well.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
And in a funny way, I think that's why Kohra to me is the better movie, compared to the
Yeah.
Hitchcock Rebecca, even though that movie is also very, very good. I think what makes Kohra more interesting to me is that it deviates a little bit from the book. Well, it deviates quite a bit from the book,
Yeah.
but at least Vahida gives her character some spine. She endows her with at least a little bit of personality, where Joan Fontaine just plays her completely bland, which is how she's written as well. Like, that's fine, but it doesn't make for very interesting viewing. Whereas to me, Vahida has at least something going on. She's still naive and doesn't have the sense of self and is insecure and is gaslit constantly by everyone around her. And you feel so bad for her. But you can see there's some spark there and some spine. And I think that's what makes me root for her. Or I don't root for Joan Fontaine's character at all.
She's bland, but then also, as I recall anyway, kind of petulant at times, like very childlike, right? So when she gets threatened, she kind of lashes out in a very immature way. But that again is kind of recognizable. Like, I feel like she is 8th grade me, 14-year-old me who never got and I know she's very young and she's led a not ideal life, but she does mention in passing, friends growing up and things like that. And like, I wouldn't really want to work for Mrs. What's her name either, but there are far worse fates that befall young women in the 1930s. Like, so it's not that bad. And I get why she wants to escape by marrying Maxim and thinks she's in love with him and everything. But, she's just like, you want to shake her so much of the time. She's just, and is she naive or maybe, is she dim? And there are moments where it's hard to tell. And I'm not sure.
That's where I do think that Joan Fontaine actually plays her a little bit dim. And it reminded me of a conversation that was it last week that we spoke about this, or I don't remember when, but I think you were saying something, and I'm probably paraphrasing and remembering incorrectly, but you said something about how sometimes happy people are portrayed as almost simpletons. Maybe it was in the Khoonbhari Mang episode.
Oh, yeah. Like the pre-dramatic. Life is so great.
Where it's almost like they're a little bit stupid. And I know you were talking about happy people, and she's clearly not a happy person, but she is portrayed kind of like a simpleton, which also makes it kind of hard to root for her, because you're kind of like, what is going on with you? But again, I don't think Vahida plays her as dim, and I don't think Vahida plays her as petulant, but I think Vahida just plays her far stronger, and maybe her character is written stronger, to the point where I think Vahida's performance is what makes Kohra for me.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Because it's certainly not Biswajit who's bringing the goods.
No, so many things that you just said I want to respond to. One of them is, I feel like Kohra, sorry, I'm mispronouncing that, is much more about, they bring in this supernatural element, which is not in the book. And I think that kind of frees up the narrator. She does have a name in the Hindi one, of course, Rajeshwari. She is more, I think it's more about the fog, right? The uncertainty than it is about a sense of self and like insecurity in a way. It's just got kind of a different, it's about something different. And I do think they did a very strong job at creating. It's very recognizably Rebecca, but it feels different. And because of all the changes they make, you really are watching this movie. This story is fresh to you. And like, you're like, oh, I know how this ends. No, you don't.
Right. Because Rebecca, the movie, is much more a very truthful retelling of the book, except for the very end. It's very like, this is the scene. Then this is the scene, and this is the scene, which honestly is not a good reason to watch the movie then, because the book is far superior. So it's kind of like, if to me the book and Rebecca are like very similar to each other, then I would rather watch the book. So I would rank the book highest, then I would rank Kohra, and then I would rank the Hitchcock movie. The other
90s,
thing,
that 90s one is, I think, if I recall, more faithful to the book in terms of what Maxim has actually done and the conclusion. Although in the 90s one, again, spoiler alert, he runs into the house at the end and tries to save Mrs. Danvers.
Really?
Who is played
by
her
perish.
She is played by Diana Rigg, which is like, that's pretty great. and so you get this like slightly, and I don't know if that's meant to redeem him a little bit since he is a murderer.
Yeah.
And his dimwit, naive bride is like, oh, but he loves me. And that's all that I can think about is he actually doesn't like Rebecca. He loves me. I don't care that he killed her in cold blood, like, or hot blood, as the case may be. And in that adaptation, he actually strangles her.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's
Oh
real, it's
dear.
pretty grisly. And you're like, oh, that's why you cast Charles Dance, right? Like
Yeah.
he's good
Well,
at that
in the
kind of thing.
book, he talks about how there's this one line that made me go, huh? Because he says, I had forgotten. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to the effect of, I'd forgotten how much blood there is. Like, how many
When you
people
kill a
have you
person,
killed? Like,
I
I know you
assume
hunt and
he's
everything, but how many people have you killed if you're saying this? I was
I
just very
assume
alarmed.
he's meant to have been in World War One, but I don't, because he's 40. How old is he?
He's
43.
44 or 46 or
So yeah,
something.
so he could have been a very young man
Okay.
in World War One. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, he's creepy.
Yeah. And then there's the thing in the book about how he then had to like scrub the floors and the carpet and everything from the
Yeah.
blood stains. I was like, you are creepy. So having read the book and watched both these movies, I am convinced that there is only one thing Maxim has ever loved in his life, and that is Manderley. His one true love
Oh
is
yeah.
Manderley.
Yeah.
His lover, his wife, his soulmate, his everything is Manderley, and everything is in service to Manderley. He marries Rebecca because Manderley needs a lady.
Mhm.
He murders Rebecca because Rebecca is pregnant and probably it's not his child because they don't sleep together. We know this. And so he doesn't want Manderley to be inherited by basically someone else's son or daughter or whatever. And then he also marries the next Mrs. De Winter again because Manderley needs a lady. Dude, Manderley is a building. It's a beautiful building, but it's a building. You have no concern whatsoever for human beings, that you just use them as pawns, and it's just Manderley is everything to you. I think it's so fitting that Manderley is destroyed in the end.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish I could have toured it first, but
I think that the Hindi version does such a nice job at making the house itself creepier. And we were talking about creepy houses in another episode.
Khudida Pashan and
right. Which
that
this
episode
is so similar to in some ways.
Yes.
It really evokes, and Mahal and
yes,
Madhumati, right? Like this has very strong Hindi or Indian cinema bones to it.
Bollywood noir.
Yeah. And I love that also they do something different than reincarnation, which those others obviously rely on in some ways. And so that's cool that they do something different with it. But yeah, I like the creepy house. I like in the Hindi version that there's the model of the house in the house. Like, as I write in this article that Pitu was talking about, like it really emphasizes that everyone's trapped and everyone's being observed and surveilled. Like, it's horrible.
It made me think of like, when people talk about like the monarchy, not that I'm fans at all, but when they talk about, I read an article recently where someone said that, Camilla may have become queen, but she will never be able to compete with Diana because dying so young and being beloved, she immediately got like, she became a saint. She's basically.
Yeah.
You can never, ever compete with her. And that's what she says, what the unnamed narrator says in Rebecca as well, right? Where she's like, you're competing basically with a ghost. She will always be young. She will always be beautiful. She will always be popular. Meanwhile, you will get old and wither and die, but she will always be Rebecca, And I love that scene in Kohara. I just thought it was so good when Vahida is so frustrated with looking at the P, because in Kohara, Rebecca's name is Poonam, and she angrily takes something, like, I don't know if it was like a pen or eyeliner or something, and she like slashes, she adds an R to it to make it her name. And it was so, I love that scene. She was so like full of rage and anger. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that's missing in the Hitchcock movie. Where's the anger?
I think that our protagonist is so, again,
wishy-washy.
Or blank or whatever, that she doesn't have that. She has, I in the book, I do find her petulant, as I was saying, but that's not the same thing. I don't think she has the sort of reserve, the well of thought and emotion or something to, and maybe she will when she's 43 also, but at, how old is she? 22 or something? Like she doesn't,
very young.
She doesn't have it.
Yeah.
I don't think she could have rage.
But there are 20-year-olds who have rage.
There are. This one does not, though.
Right.
I don't think Rajeshwari is supposed to be any older than that, really. And she clearly, yeah, and it is interesting to see a Indian film that's got a kind of has decided to give the woman a richer character than an English source. Maybe that happens a lot. I'm just not thinking of it, but I thought that was interesting that like of all the people, like if I did have to choose which of these people I wanted to hang out with, it's Rajeshwari.
Oh, for
contest,
sure.
right? Like none
Absolutely.
of these other people.
Like I'm rooting for Rajeshwari. I don't particularly care about Joan Fontaine one way or the other.
No.
I also find like in Kohra, the Daima, played by Lalita Pawar, so good, such a well-written role compared to Miss Danvers. Miss Danvers is very caricaturish. She's very cardboardy.
Yeah.
I mean, she's much more menacing and malignant and frightening to me in the book, but the way she's played, it's very like it's very, I don't know, there's just such a lackluster performance, I thought, compared to Lalita Pawar, who just like freaks me out every time she comes. But then there's the scene where she talks about how much she loved Poonam when she was little, and it's just so much multi-layered. Like I hate her, but I also kind of feel bad for her. Like if she loved this horrible psychopathic woman like a mother, that's gotta hurt when she died. So I have some sympathy for her.
Yeah, and how Rajeshwari at the end is like, Daima, you're the greatest, you saved us or whatever, which is I could have done without that, I have to say. Like,
I could have,
is murderer.
Yes.
cannot emphasize enough. These people are murderers. It's not like they exiled her or something. They killed her.
Right. Although, is Biswajit capable of doing anything energetic, including killing someone?
Let's please talk about Biswajit, because for me, one of the things I loved in the book was that until you find out what Maxim has done, I kind of liked him, right?
Oh, I did too.
He's fairly calm. He's maybe not sunny, but like personable and like, he's not a tyrant or anything like that. Whereas what's his character's name? Amit is again, like petulant, kind of a jerk, like right away doesn't even walk into his house with his bride. He leaves her in the car and tells everyone else what to do and like leaves her there to mess up in front of everyone. Like he's just a jerk. And then Biswajit, it's hard to follow Laurence Olivier.
I know.
But of all the people to do it, it's not Biswajit. Right. So like I feel for him in a way. And like, did you notice? I think I talked about this when we talked about Wahida Rehman, but somebody in makeup hates him because they made him like white like a piece of paper. He looks ridiculous.
His mooch,
so he's tiny little stylized, but like I think he's okay in the songs actually. But other than that, I think that this was not who they should have cast. I don't care what they were in together before. It's not a good performance. I think there's so many men at this time who could have done a better job. Like honestly, Raj Kapoor would have been really good in this role. I feel like he would have been great at like finding out someone's secretly
and he's very believable as a murderer. So
he is. And I think he could do the like besotted in the song thing, obviously perfectly well. Amrita and I were talking.
I would have cast actually Raj Kumar.
Yeah, he could have been good.
He's just he seems very to the manner born and just has this kind of haughtiness to him and this cockiness, and you can see him being very controlling. And of course, I'm thinking of him because of that movie he did with Hema Malini. Was it Lal Patthar?
Yes.
Right? Where movie is making me think that he would have been so perfect as Mr. De Winter, where you can kind of see where someone would be taken in by him because he's just got such a magnetic personality.
And Biswajit is not magnetic. I like him better in his Bengali movies than Hindi, but like he's nothing to write home about. And I was talking with Amrita about there's so many things in this movie that I'm like, why isn't there a Bengali version of this? Because it seems very Bengali movie to me. Uttam Kumar would have been amazing in this role. And one of the things I love about Olivier, whose work I've barely seen, I have to be honest.
Same.
He's just like there. He's there. And then he uncorks and it's magnificent. Like that performance so great. And I feel like there are various actors from Indian cinema at this time who could do that if that's what was wanted. I'm not saying it has to be that way, but like, someone making this huge confession and everything, like you have got to have somewhat of an actor in this role. And Biswajit is not it. He is not it. And it's very,
he just really sleepwalks. And I feel like, I mean, okay, so terrible actor, we know this, but I also feel like he is done no justice at all by the way his character is written. And I almost feel right. And I feel like that character should have been actually written for Manoj Kumar, because his behavior is classic Manoj Kumar. All it's missing is this.
Yeah,
that's all it's missing, and a rant, of course, about how West bad, India good. But
right, which they could have done, because she's taught Poonam was like went abroad for her education and everything. They even bring that up, and like so she's
that is a Manoj Kumar role that they gave to Biswajit. Right. I suppose we should thank our lucky stars they didn't cast Manoj Kumar, but still, Vahida deserved better.
He wouldn't have been worse, really. Like, yeah. Biswajit, I feel like in some films is quite handsome, right? Like I can see how he looks like a matinee idol at times in some films.
Okay.
But again, the ghost face and the like tiny little mustache, again, like lay off the Olivier and just look like, I don't know. He was really not helped. But then again, you best get out of the way of Wahida Rehman and Lalita Pawar when they are in full tilt, right? Like there's no room for anyone else in this movie anyway. And it's great. There
was so much tension, like in their scenes with each other. And it's just, Lalita Pawar is frightening. She is frightening. Like when she doesn't even raise her voice. She just keeps her voice at that tone. And you're just like, oh.
When she's going, like doing her beat, like Narayan,
yes.
Narayan, you're like, oh. What's happening?
Absolutely terrifying. And I love that scene when she's in the whatever it's called, the witness stand in the courthouse, and the person is like, well, for a person, you're very religious, clearly, so surely you would tell the truth. And she's like, of course. And you're like, oh, yes. Like, who would go up against her? I would not. But yeah.
Let me ask you something about the Hindi version, which is, so when I was I'd watched it years ago. I watched it back in this fall, and then I watched some of it again yesterday. And then my DVD froze and like wouldn't play anymore. And it was very sad because this is not online with subtitles that I could find anywhere.
Right.
So I actually bought a DVD, which is now going to be a coaster.
Right.
Do you think that, so there's the great scenes with Wahida in Poonam's room, Rajeshwari in Poonam's room, and like the wind is howling and the bed covers are being messed up. Is she imagining that? Are we supposed to say there is a ghost? And if it is Poonam's ghost, is she trying to haunt Rajeshwari, or is she trying to haunt Daima? And she's just like messing up the room because she knows Daima is fastidious about the room.
So I was actually thinking about this again, because it is such a big departure from the book and from Rebecca, the movie. And what it made me think of was, I will tell you what it made me think of. But first, just to say that I don't think it was a ghost. I really do think that it was Rajeshwari's mind playing tricks on her.
I tend to agree.
And I think she was almost like hallucinating. Yeah. It's possible that due to her upbringing and the fact that she was almost married off to like some idiot person, and just all of the trauma she's probably experienced, she possibly has a tendency towards a lot of anxiety and things like that. She's probably been experiencing panic attacks thanks to being in this horrible house called Mayfair. Yeah. And I think all of that stuff is just coming, and it's like she's basically headed for a mental breakdown if she doesn't take good care of herself. And I think sort of the walls are closing in, and that's why she's imagining these things. So I just thought that it was sort of like hallucinations and you need to see a doctor stat. But what it reminded me of, have you read this really old story that I read it a long time ago, it really haunted me. It's called The Yellow Wallpaper.
That sounds very familiar. Tell me what happens.
It's a short story. It's very famous or infamous. It's set during Victorian times, and it's a woman who is being gaslit so much that, they kind of want to send her off to the asylum or something. And she's not sure anymore, like, am I actually going crazy, or are they gaslighting me? It's considered one of the finest works on like gaslighting as a
Okay.
concept.
Okay.
And the yellow wallpaper refers to the fact that, you stare something long enough and, you start wondering what it is. I mean, that
Yeah.
happens to us sometimes, right? Like you're sleep deprived, you're reading a book and you read a word and you're like, I've never heard this word before.
Right.
Meanwhile, it's something very basic, like forever. And you're like, forever? Never heard that before.
Forever.
What is this word? So it kind of made me feel like there was like a psychological because everyone is lying to you.
Yeah.
Your husband, nothing is as it seems. The other thing I noticed that made Cora so much more powerful to me than Rebecca the movie, there's too much goings on in Rebecca, the book and the movie. There's people visiting. There's the sister-in-law visiting. There's the entire staff. Rebecca, the unnamed narrator, is never alone. She's always surrounded by tons of people. There's the fancy dress ball. There's the ghost of Rebecca. Well, not literal ghost, but the spirit of her or whatever. Yeah. In Cora, she's so isolated. It almost seems abusive to me. She's alone all the time. There's no friends. It's shocking to me that you're portraying an Indian family back in the era and there's no one visiting. I'm not saying it has to be like a joint family, but surely there's like nosy relatives visiting. And if he's like this rich, if he's like a rich zamindar, doesn't he have like tenants coming in complaining about something? Doesn't he have accountants coming? Like, why is there no one coming and going? There's very few scenes where you see guests in their house. The servants essentially keep out of her way as well. She's just alone all the time. And it's like, unlike the ennui and the boredom you see in Charulata, all of this isolation is just playing tricks on her. You feel so bad. I want to be her friend.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Also in Cora, I want to talk about how, I was going to say weird, and I don't think that's fair, how unusual the beginning, 8 minutes or something, because they take the events that we learn, the flashback to what happened to Poonam is hinted at, although not shown exactly, because we still get the reveal of who did what at the end. But like you actually kind of see what happened to her. You get a bit of a sense of her character. You get her being fussed at by Daima. You see the weird kind of unstable guy who lives down by the beach. You see the cousin / lover, whatever. Is he the cousin in the film, in the Hindi film too? I don't remember, but so they throw a lot at you. And when I first saw Cora, I didn't remember the plot of Rebecca super well. And I was like, what's going on? I was so confused because you don't see a lot of faces super directly. It's dark. It was a dark and stormy night. There's, footprints and a kind of a fun, interesting song. And then she greets that room full of people who are there. So much happens in that first thing and it's a flashback, basically. I was very confused, but then watching it again yesterday, when I knew, I was like, man, this is really good at setting up like, woo. And I wonder if the makers of Cora assumed that pretty much everyone watching it had read or seen Rebecca. Do you think that would be the case? I just have no idea. Like, was this a film aimed at the people who are reading English novels?
I kind of doubt it.
Because I just do feel like it would be confusing. And listeners, if anyone also saw Cora without having really been very familiar with Rebecca, and you also were confused, please tell us, because I love a good opening flashback, but that one had so much atmosphere and kind of mood setting and all that I was quite confused.
It also had that, like, the shower shot and everything, which first of all put me in mind of Psycho.
Of course.
And then I was like, wait, she's under a shower. And then of course that didn't happen. But I don't know, to answer your question, I don't think that Cora was necessarily aimed at people who were reading. But then again, I was an adult in the 1960s. No. I just think that probably it was an artistic choice to confuse people, or it was not an artistic choice. It was just poor direction.
Well, or it was an artistic.
They were being very clear.
As we have discussed, like you and I both call ourselves dumb at times. So like maybe I was just dumb and didn't get it.
No, I was confused too. I was kind of like, what is going on? She's getting ready. Okay, that's fine. But then who is this? And then it's like, what? It was a lot. Okay. Yeah. There was a lot going on. This was not an opening where you're, like sometimes you're going to watch a movie and you're getting settled on the couch and you're heating up your tea and you're like, oh, hey, the credits will begin. Like, who pays that much attention to the first 5 minutes of a movie? I don't. you just assume that the credits will begin and then eventually start. This one just goes boom.
Bam. Yeah.
It wastes no time getting
time.
to the point, and then eventually the credits come on and you're like, what just happened?
And it's not, so often when we get a flashback at the beginning, as in my beloved 70s Masala, you see little kids. So like, oh, that's going to grow up and be Amitabh Bachchan or whatever. But this doesn't have that. It has, and the faces you do recognize are clearly going to be secondary characters, because those actors are always secondary characters. The woman who plays Poonam, I don't even think is barely in anything else. She's certainly not a super familiar face. So, and I don't think you get it. Do you even get a shot of her whole face in that beginning?
No, it's always hidden by like a veil or something.
Yeah. So it's effectively unsettling and confusing. And I wonder if it was supposed to be, but I'm easily confused. Don't go by what I say.
Yeah. Ooh. Can we talk about the sweet little dog Jasper in the book and the movie? And then in this one, it's called Cherry. He's so cute. We love
Jasper. We love the comfort that dogs bring in.
Yes.
And in the novel, I was really impressed with how often she refers to Jasper, and then the older dog who is that Jasper's mother? I can't remember.
Yes. The mother.
Like I think they represent like ideal domesticity and all that kind of stuff. And like, obviously companionship, and Jasper is with her all the way. And he's so cute.
Yeah. And I love that it's the only thing that originally belonged to Rebecca that she can wholeheartedly accept, because the husband is secondhand, the house is secondhand, the maids are literally every single thing, including their bed, everything is secondhand. The dog is secondhand too, but the dog does love her for who she is.
But they use a different bedroom they use a different room.
But someone has still used it though.
I suppose, but they make a big point of saying Poonam's room and Rebecca's room is in the other wing of the house. Like you can't even go over there. But no, Jasper is, although I guess like the sister-in-law and then her
husband,
Maxim's like right-hand man, who's kind of less of a figure in the Hindi version, but is quite prominent in the book, especially. Those people like her better. They like the narrator better. So it's interesting that she doesn't seem to trust the people who would know him best. That Maxim does actually, chose her for reasons anyway, even if it's not love exactly, right? It's like she's so insecure that she can't even take on board these quite good inputs, actually.
Well, it's interesting because like the book basically tells you that Rebecca was a sociopath. Like she was like in no uncertain terms. Like there's references. Miss Danvers herself talks about how she beat a horse, whipped a horse enough that she drew blood. Which reminds me of Kabir Bedi's character in Khun Bhari Maang. So many things about this book and movie reminded me of Khun Bhari Maang. And then there's scenes like, all the horrible things that she's done since she was a child that Mrs. Danvers, by the way, is proud of, which I was like, okay, you were equally sociopathic, like y'all be crazy.
And that's so interesting, right? Because Mrs. Danvers is proud of Rebecca's competitiveness, her viciousness, her determination, her arrogance, whatever. And Daima is judgy about Rebecca, so much so that the end is what it is. So like, as obsessed as they both are with the Rebecca character, their attitudes are actually quite different. And for the record, I do think the reading of Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca is there being some kind of sexual or romantic thing there. I think that's very valid. Like I totally see why people pull that from the text. The Hindi one is of course not going to go in that direction. And I didn't really get that too much. I feel like you could if you wanted to, but to me that didn't leap out. But just that she's as obsessive, but for different reasons, kind of, or like but about different
equally
things.
Screwed up.
Oh yeah. Equally not
good. No, but they're like the relationship between Mrs. Danvers and Rebecca reminded me of another very creepy. Quasi mother-daughter relationship, which is the one in Great Expectations between Miss Havisham and the young girl whose name I have now forgotten. Stella? Because it's the same Stella, yes. Because it's the same thing, right? Where Miss Havisham essentially trains her to hate men and to hate people and just hate men in general and to use them before they can use you, because Miss Havisham thinks that men just use women, and she's been left at the altar and all of those things. And Mrs. Danvers is also very proud of the fact that Rebecca basically uses men. And it just really reminded me of Miss Havisham, which almost like we know why Miss Havisham is the way she is. It's because of her heartbreak and the sense of betrayal. But we actually don't know anything about Mrs. Danvers beyond the fact that she essentially raised Rebecca. We don't know anything about her. And I was almost curious, like I would watch a movie that was made on a young Mrs. Danvers, like what made her the woman she became, and what extent, what extent did she influence? I was like, you remind me very much of Miss Havisham in many, many ways. And I wonder what it was that tipped you over into like to the psycho side. So that was very interesting.
I think it's not too hard to imagine for Daima particularly, but also Mrs. Danvers. There's a lot of really awful men out there. She could have grown up with a horrible father or brother or neighbor or anything. She could have been assaulted. It could be literally anything that we know women experience all the time. So I'm like, wouldn't take, I can see how it wouldn't take much if you kind of were of an influenceable nature anyway. And then like one bad incident. Now, is that enough to turn you into a killer and like a sort of, this interesting combination of moral high ground killer? It's like kind of like Mother India, right? Like, my offspring does not live up to my standards. I'll shoot him dead in the street. Like basically the same kind of vibe, and I like it. so interesting. And I did gasp the first time I saw Cora and was like, because I did not see that coming at all. Like I would have expected a twin before I expected that,
Right. For sure. But you know how I have this terrible habit of casting, right? So I love casting. And I was thinking to myself, like, this is one movie that I do not mind if they were to remake it. Although my rule is that it can only be remade by Vishal Bharadwaj because I trust nobody else. Only Vishal Bharadwaj is allowed to remake it. And I was thinking, how cool would it be if Wahida Rahman today played Mrs. Danvers?
That'd be great.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Because awesome. I don't think has Wahida ever played like an out and out baddie?
My gut instinct is going to be absolutely not, but I don't know her filmography well enough to say that, but it's hard to imagine.
She's played very like complex, multi-layered characters that don't necessarily live up to society's extremely narrow definitions of morality. But I don't think she's ever played like a baddie, like a bad person. I just think it would be so cool to see Wahida. You're what, 80 plus now? You have no F's to give. Just do it. It would be so cool. Just play the terrible Daima. It would be so amazing to see her play Mrs. Danvers. And then for the role of the unnamed narrator, you could have this very innocent ingenue type of person, like, Tripti Dimri would be great.
Oh, she would be great. Yeah.
She would be so good. Like with her big wide eyes, but less tremulousness, please. We do not want a Joan Fontaine repeat. We do not want a Kala repeat, or at least I don't. Or, Sania Malhotra would be really good. She brings some of that innocence as well. But that would be so cool.
Who is Maxim in your
I don't know. I actually have no idea, because everyone I can think of as Maxim is way older than 46. Like I was thinking of Manoj Bajpayee.
Yeah, he's a little old. So here's who came to mind for me.
Ooh, tell me.
Have you seen Monica, Oh My Darling? I forget.
Yes, I have.
That. Oh, you have?
I did. It has Rajkumar.
Yeah, I think he'd be pretty good at it.
Oh, is he too young though?
Maybe a little, but like, when do we ever worry about a hero being too young for something? But I think he can do the like, seems like a normal guy, is not. He can play that for sure.
I can see that. Ranveer Singh could work too. Because we've seen him play like a shady person in Lutera, where he wasn't what he seemed. And he can definitely bring that born into privilege vibe.
We know he can do glint of murderousness from
yes, for sure, from many movies.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
That could be cool.
And
I
I don't
can't
think
believe
you
I'm advocating for a remake, but here we are.
now, do you want them to remake the story as it's presented in Korra, or do you want it more like the novel?
I'm okay with either.
Yeah,
I
I think,
love the novel and I love
yeah,
Kohara as well. So
yeah,
I would be fine with either. But I
yeah.
like the ending of the novel the best. That is my favorite ending
Mm,
for sure. I love how, if you're reading it and you can just miss it and you're like, wait, what was that? And you reread it again because they're driving and it's like almost
it just
dawn.
stops.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And he's like, there's light, and she says there's light out or whatever. And he's like, yeah, but that's not east, that's west. And she's like, oh, and then he's like, and then they talk about how the ashes are coming their way, and
yeah.
it's not explicit at all. And then it's like the end.
No,
And you're like, holy shit, what do you mean by ashes? And there's light in the west. It's on fire. Someone has
yeah.
literally burned Manderley down. I love how creepy that ending is. Where the ending in the movie in Rebecca is very unappealing with the candles and everything
Oh
and the
yeah.
bed up in flames. It's very melodramatic. I didn't care for
I
that.
I was and in Korra, it's so disappointing to have like praise for Daima. You're like, nope, 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 nope. This is still not, no, nope. Huna may have been an awful person, but you don't get to just bump her off and then have another
Yeah.
person think have two people think that they are responsible for her murder, not just the one.
So, what is your opinion of Maxim? I mean, obviously, we know that he's murdered her, and that's terrible. But I've always found Maxim so strange. Like, for example, okay, like your pride was hurt, you were married to this psycho person, and discovering that she may have possibly been pregnant because she does threaten him,
Yeah.
discovering that she may have been pregnant with someone else's son, and the hint of scandal, all of that leads him to do what he does. And obviously, we don't condone it. But it's like, what is with this dude? He is as screwed up.
He's really screwed up. And I
Yeah.
think as bad as all of that is, it is also bad that out of he overcorrects and marries
Mm.
his second wife is, I think, fairly unsuitable for him and for the life that we understand the owner of Manderley to need to lead.
Mm.
And in fact, for them to be happy together, Manderley has to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So, and as you were saying, like Maxim is Manderley is Maxim, right? So like he's kind of a different person by the end. And like in the 90s version that I watched,
Mm.
he tries to save Mrs. Danvers. He falls coming down the stair, like carrying her down the
Oh.
stairs. She didn't make it, but he did. And then you see them like, I don't know where they're supposed to be, like in the Riviera or I don't know, somewhere else in Britain. They've left Manderley. It's gone. They haven't rebuilt it. They can't, it's noted that he can't have children.
Oh,
So the
interesting.
line is done, right? So
Yeah.
Manderley is really, really done.
Yeah.
And they look perfectly happy together. And they're like, she's sketching and he's happily reading a newspaper and they're kind of like cute together. And it's really
Huh.
weird. So I feel like there's something very dodgy about why he marries the second Mrs. De Winter, because if all he wanted was a younger woman who could presumably bear him children, and as gross as I think that is, I get that it's a concern for the landed, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
but
The air and the spare.
there were literally hundreds of women at his disposal
Right.
who would be better suited than
That's
she
true.
is. And I think it shows a real selfishness on his part, because yeah, he kind of offers her, he does definitely offer her an out to a life that she doesn't want, right? But I think that it's a selfish act to ask this woman, who clearly is going to say yes, to
Mm.
come into this ridiculous life that you have, and is made extra ridiculous by your own horrible secret. So he's, on the surface, he's kind of like, good
Knight
enough
in
kind of
shining
guy.
armor.
Yeah, like, that never worked on me since I'm not a teenager, but like, yeah, so he does rescue her. He does provide her in some ways a better life, but it's actually not really. And like, he's just asking so much of her without telling her anything. And I was really interested to see in the wiki article about the novel that Du Maurier said that at the time, most critics missed something she really wanted them to pick up on, which is the power imbalance between
Yes.
Maxim and the second Mrs. De Winter. And I feel like the Hindi film, interestingly, really nails that, because there's so much done with like Biswajit is higher up in the frame than Wahida. She's literally
falling
at his feet. Yeah, all the time. And I feel like they did that really well. And I think that deserves more, I can see why that would get lost in the shuffle of everything else that's going on in the novel. But yeah, he's even if so he is quite on purpose a creep and murderer, but he's also kind of maybe subconsciously a creep too. Like, I'm not saying he was predatory to go after this young woman exactly, but like, it's very, very selfish what he does at the best, I think. So he's a really interesting character, and I really salute the writing of that novel. Like, it's an amazing novel. Yeah.
I was actually thinking about like the emotional abuse aspect of it, because I was like, okay, so why 10 months after this extremely traumatic thing has happened? Because yes, he's a murderer, but I'm sure it's traumatic for him too, that he he actually killed and murdered and drowned, like sunk the boat and all of that, and this is a secret that's weighing on him. And and he says at some point in the book that he knew it was only a matter of time that it would come, because as someone was it Shakespeare who said truth will out, and he's like, it's only a matter of time, like he's living on borrowed time. So I was like, okay, well, it's only 10 months, and now you find this like young, innocent, naive girl in Monte Carlo, which, by the way, is where you honeymooned with your first wife. So why are you again in Monte Carlo? Wouldn't you want to be as far away from that place as possible, like same hotel even? And he takes her to that same lookout point in his car where he had taken Rebecca, where 5 days after his marriage to Rebecca, he wanted to like throw her off the cliff, which he had murderous tendencies from the start.
Yeah, he did.
I interpreted it as he was very controlling and abusive, and he wanted someone that he could control in sort of like an iron grip, because it was such a huge blow to his ego, and he did not want to risk anyone who was strong-headed or independent or educated or had like a good support system who could possibly leave him.
It's like
and so he's
leader,
like,
right?
It's exactly, it's like, let me find this person who has nothing else to fall back on, who has no safety net whatsoever, and I'll marry her, and then I'll imprison her in this golden cage called Manderley, and that'll be that. And there's that scene in Kora, right, where, as you were saying, when they come for the first time and Biswajit leaves Wahida in the car and he goes and talks to the servants or whatever, and then she mistakenly falls at Daima's feet, and then she's embarrassed because everyone laughs, and then she goes inside and she complains to him, and she's like, you left me alone. And then he says, I'm going to go visit one of my jagirs tonight, and I'll be back by the evening, whatever. It reminded me a little bit of Paheli. But it's their first day after their wedding, and he's doing the accounts, and he says, tomorrow at dawn I will be gone, and oh, by the way, I'll be gone for like 5 years. And she's like, excuse me, what? So there's this notion of, I married you, but I have no interest in being married to you,
and no real Well, I was about to say no real responsibility, although I understand that he would probably say, like, I gave her a house, she's going to be fed and clothed and won't have to work, and blah, 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 blah. So I am filling my responsibility to her. And you're like, well,
it's so icky. And it's like, I think that the specter of Rebecca is so strong, and the way we feel about Mrs. Danvers is so strong, that it's almost easy to miss Maxim and how horrendous he is. Yeah,
I agree.
He almost like ghosts. You don't even notice him but he's awful.
And men like that do skate along, right? Being kind of often getting to get away with stuff because we're all just like, it's some rich guy, like, and we don't really question it. And like how snowed everyone around them is by these, mainly by the parties, it seems like. So I'm like, clearly there needs to be more of a like community center in this town or something, like get some action going. So
true.
What did you think of in the novel, and now I can't remember in the 1940 version, I blanked on her name, the rich American woman that our heroine is working for at the very beginning of the
Van Hopper.
What do you think about Mrs. Van Hopper? And then there is no Mrs. Van Hopper in
Kora.
Yeah.
Just a little bit caricaturish,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it's interesting to me how, like, a person can be a jerk, but they can still be right. And you
Yes.
don't want to admit it, but it's kind
Yes.
of like that, like in the beginning when she's just sort of like sneering at the unnamed narrator, and she's kind of like, Max de Winterfell, for you, really? And you're just like, you're such an asshole, can't you just be happy for this young girl? Like, she's out of your clutches now, you witch. And
Yeah.
she's going to go have a happy life. And there's that moment in the book where the unnamed narrator fantasizes about how she's going to send like a letter to Miss Van Hopper and be
Yeah.
like, oh, life is so great at Manderley. And she's kind of like, the dead Mrs. De Winter, Rebecca, was like so amazing, blah blah. You're like nothing. And you're like, you were such a jerk. And I hope that the unnamed narrator proves you wrong. Except she wasn't wrong.
No, she was not wrong. In
No.
that 90s version I watched, that character is played by a fantastic cameo by Faye Dunaway.
Oh my gosh.
Who is playing her as it's a different flavor. She's playing her as like older, but I don't know how old Faye Dunaway is in the 90s.
60s,
like
maybe? Oh, in the 90s.
So she's, it's 25 years before right now.
Yeah.
This is the late 90s. So she's
maybe
the
late 90s, 25
like
years before now?
Yeah, girl.
That is a quarter of a century, Beth. I know. Are you correct?
I'm so sorry. Well, it's 2023. So yeah.
Well, math is not my strong point. So
and she plays her as like this kind of older party girl who like is trying to flirt with Maxim some, and like throws a party and invites him and insists that they like all have a toast to Rebecca, and when he storms out, she's like, dude, whatever crawled up his butt, like, yeah, she's really fun. And so when she finds out about the relationship and the woman is going to go get married, she's like, good luck, honey. And again, she is right. She doesn't know what, she's not right for the exact reasons she is, but her general gist of, you can't handle this situation with this man is in fact quite accurate, because she knows that world, even though she's clearly like a climbery sort of hanger on and everyone's annoyed by her.
Yeah.
Nosy. So she understands what this is about in a way that our narrator absolutely cannot. And, fair enough, maybe wouldn't know, but I also feel like if our narrator has been having to work, she's not palling around, that was the wrong phrase, but like tagging along Mrs. Van Hopper, if you'd had your eyes open, you should have noticed some of this stuff about this world, right? So again, is she dim?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you said it yourself. She's kind of dim because she is sort of like the person who's helping at the card games and everything. So it's not like she's completely, and usually the thing with such parties or whatever one assumes is that people think that because you're the hired help, you don't have ears, or rather they don't care. Right. So they have loose tongues around you. So surely she would, I mean, I think Mrs. Van Hopper, just being an older lady and being a social climber and at least being privy to this world, if not part of it exactly, I think she just saw all the red flags that Max de Winter, like he's just one walking, I'll be dashing red flag. And she was just like, you are out of your depth, girl. Like you are, you should not be with this. You should be like with a nice man, perhaps an accountant, or a school teacher,
the local
not this
vicar,
one.
Like,
yes.
Yeah, not this is, or as I felt like was implied in the novel, the Maxim's right-hand man, whose name I cannot remember, Frank. Yeah, like that guy. Yeah, that would make more sense. But yeah, it's I don't know. I really enjoyed that little turn by Faye Dunaway. So if you want to see that, this is on PBS. I watched it on the PBS website. I don't know if you have to be on Passport to do it or not, but you might be able to find a clip on YouTube or something, because some of those British shows, they just don't seem to bother taking off of YouTube. But I quite enjoyed that adaptation, and she was one of the highlights, I thought. Although the dog is also very cute.
So cute. I liked that scene a lot in Korra, which was not in the book and therefore not in Rebecca the movie either. Do you remember that scene where Daima basically wants to passive aggressively prove how important she is and how Mayfair runs because of her? It's that scene where she essentially decides not to do anything for the day, and all the servants start coming to Rajeshwari one after the other, and they're like, what do we make for lunch? The servants are just sitting around. They don't know what to do. Can you give them orders? And they just keep coming at her, and eventually she just screams and she's like, I don't know what to do. And it's just like one way that Daima proves to her how important she is and how incapable Rajeshwari is. Like just the power games in this movie or in the source material is amazing.
Magnificent.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would change? So in your ranking, what is your favorite of all of these things that we discussed?
Oh, I mean, the book for sure. I feel like it's almost unfair to compare the Hindi version to the other one simply because the story has been so altered.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? Because it's only like 10% of the story that's been altered in some ways, but like it's a very significant 10%.
Yeah.
So they're really, it's like, you know, like, do you like your Shakespeare adaptations modern instead of New York City, or do you like them, you know, 16th century Verona or whatever? What do you prefer?
Right.
They're all valid, you know? So it's kind of hard to say, but I really, as much as I enjoyed all three of the filmed versions that I watched, and I did think Joan Fontaine is really good at making the narrator into the kind of character that we were talking about. And I'm impressed by Laurence Olivier, like a newsflash, he's really good. So yeah, I like them all, but the book is the masterpiece. And I would say all of these are strong, I think, and like they do good things with good material, but the book would remain supreme, I think, to me. And if you told me I could never watch any of these adaptations again, I'd be like, okay, you know, I don't need to see them again. But that book is, I can absolutely see why it's popular. I'm sure there's a million billion PhD theses written on it, and super enjoyed it.
It's brilliant. I think my favorite thing about Rebecca is how unremittingly awful everyone is.
Yeah, right.
Except for Jasper. Jasper is the only one I like. Except for Jasper, everybody sucks. All the people suck.
Frank isn't too bad, and the sister-in-law and her husband, they're not bad, but they're kind of you know, like they don't act on their knowledge quite enough in some ways. I feel like, because we're obviously led to think that Frank, they even discuss it, like, did Frank know what happened? And they're like, I think he's got it figured out by now.
Yeah.
So I don't blame him for not acting on it until he couldn't, before he figured it out, right? But like, so the sister-in-law, I feel like she must have observed some of how Rebecca actually was. Now I know that there's all this point made of like how everyone's in love with Rebecca, men, women, children, animals, whatever. But I feel like since she knows Maxim well, she must be able to discern something, but that, I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I've certainly been fooled by people a lot in my life. So like, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't think that those three people are unrelentingly awful, but everyone else sure is.
Yeah. No, did you say in the book though that Rebecca used to flirt a lot with Giles, who is the brother-in-law, and so she didn't like that, and all of that. So, but yeah, it seems kind of cruel, doesn't it? Like, you know what, you're just letting this new bride who has no support system, and you're not taking her under your wing, and you're not like helping her, although
that she tries,
I don't know,
she tries a little, which is awful. That was awful. But yeah, so she tries in her own like blundering horsewoman way. And you know that if our narrator was into the same hobbies as Beatrice, Beatrice would have had her with her every day. But Beatrice doesn't really know how to relate to other people super well. And like, she gives her those art books, which is kind of like the best she can do. And it's really thoughtful in its own way. Right. So like, so Beatrice, I like Beatrice, and I feel for her.
Yeah.
But I do wish that she had sort of put two and two together a little bit more. Not that she would have figured out what Maxim did. I don't mean that. I just mean like, observe this situation that's in front of you and kind of think like, does this person seem like they're okay? Like, she's not okay. And your brother's also not okay, which everyone knew, because they were like, oh, 6 months ago, you seemed awful. Like, guys, keep thinking.
But also the siblings are portrayed as not being close at all. And Maxim doesn't really like spending time with her. And there's the time when Beatrice invites the unnamed narrator and Maxim to Christmas at her house. And Maxim is like, yeah, we're not going.
And also, I think, was it in the book that it says there's a point after which they stopped socializing with them, except for the big events, because they didn't want to be together, like they didn't. Rebecca and Maxim and Giles and Beatrice don't socialize together.
Yeah.
Just the four of them, because I guess maybe
I just assumed
on Giles or whatever.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, that makes sense. But I just wish Beatrice had been a little less of adult. But upper class English people, not always the sharpest tacks in the box, as we learned from real life.
I want blundering horsewoman on a t-shirt now. Not that I am one. I'm just a blundering dog and cat person.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm a blundering dog woman.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else to add? Except for people should read this book and watch these movies.
Yeah, I have a question about Cora. Do you think that we are supposed to read Poonam as, okay, she's clearly bad. Did she deserve what happened to her or not? And how do we reconcile Daima's like unwavering affection for her, yet also severe punishment of her? Like, are we just supposed to accept that Poonam is sort of in a fog, like the concept of Poonam is foggy? Like, how do we put those things together?
So I never got the impression from watching Cora that Poonam was like psycho. I think she's portrayed as bad. I think she's definitely portrayed as someone who's like promiscuous and who's been having affairs behind Amit's back. But I don't think she's ever portrayed as like a psychopath or a sociopath.
Not vicious and beating animals, right? And things like that. Yeah, but she's like bad Western. She's not like bad.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's actually in Cora, it's Daima who really comes across as sociopathic.
Oh yeah,
because Daima is one of those people that like, I think like she has no family of her own. She's not married. She doesn't have children. Her child was Poonam, like because she raised her. And so she has in a way like those boundaries between self and child, or self and really employer's child, have all gotten like washed away. And she just has so much love, but also control and all these feelings about Poonam, and she's so disappointed. But because it's like, okay, even if Poonam is promiscuous or whatever, what's it to you? You're a paid servant. It is literally nothing to you. Just turn a blind eye to it and move on. But that's not. She just can't do that. So she's to me, obsessive. In Cora, the really sociopathic person in there, the person who's really abnormal, is actually Daima.
Oh, sure.
Poonam is actually not portrayed like that. Poonam is portrayed as a person who is promiscuous, and that is very distressing to Amit, as it would be to anyone. And the servants and people probably gossip about her for that reason, because it's probably hard for someone to hide that fact about their lifestyle. But she's never portrayed as someone like absolutely hideous. And one assumes perhaps that if Daima had not offed her, she perhaps would have lived in this weird marriage of convenience with Amit, because Amit does not strike me as someone who was going to kill her. I don't know.
I mean, as you were saying, it's kind of hard to imagine Biswajit doing that. So, but as you said,
I don't think he has the energy to plot murder.
He's not helped by the writing of his character, as you said. So Amit is a bit of a,
He would need a few shots of like Red Bull or caffeine to summon up the energy to think of murdering Poonam. I don't think he has the energy for it, honestly.
I mean, he's got a gun, right? So.
True. I think he can probably summon up the energy for that.
I mean, he thought he had killed her. So
yeah, I think it's Daima who's like, really sociopathic. Like she's the real villain in Cora, apart from the Cora itself. But I think in Rebecca, she's not. Well, she's kind of sociopathic in that too. There is that part where she tries to get the unnamed narrator to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Why is everybody in this book so terrible, Beth?
You said it, like living out in the country in your weird, like mansion full of people who work for you, but can't be your friend and don't actually tell you the truth about anything. Like, it's not that healthy.
It sounds terrible. It sounds so bad. It's like life in a goldfish bowl. It sounds horrendous, which is funny because in Cora, there's a really nice aquarium that I had my eye on because I love aquariums, and there's like all the fishies in it. And I was like, interesting choice.
But then also the taxidermied leopards, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Oh, I love those where they're like, they have such an overdramatic expression. I feel like it actually made me giggle. Like it came at like a scene of suspense. We were supposed to be scared, and they were like, ah.
So we have grumpy camel, and now we have overdramatic leopard. We have quite a
Biggest
menagerie
acting
here on Filmy
lovers.
Ladies.
We do. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of Filmy Ladies. We had such a good time discussing Rebecca Kohra. If you have seen Rebecca or Kohra or all of those or none of those, and you want to discuss, just let us know in the comments. We have so much we want to discuss with you and talk about because this source material is so rich and complex and screwed up, you guys. So we're very interested in hearing what you have to say. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And we will be back next week with another episode. Thank you for watching. Bye.